Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. This is our 2013 Mitsubishi Fuso FG that I'm trying to turn into an overland camper. The struggle I'm having is the engine. About 3 months ago, I backed the truck into the shop and everything was perfectly fine. The next time I went to start it, I got absolutely nothing. On the Mitsubishi 4P10 engine, we have a Bosch CP4 fuel pump that sits right here. That fuel pump is driven from a shaft that runs up through here and is spun by the timing chain that comes from the crank, and it also has a second gear that spins the timing chain that runs up to the cams. Those two gears are held onto the shaft with a bolt that comes through from the front of the PCV filter, and they're timed by a small pin. Pin number 27.
Little tiny pin number 27.
So here's the theory. If the old pump locked up, did it shear the pin that actually drives it from the gear that's being spun by the crank? So if that's the case and this old pump locked up and sheared the pin, then it doesn't matter what I do with the new pump isn't going to spin either.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
So let's see if we can take a couple things apart on this engine that'll help us understand what might be going on that engine.
To start, I need to remove the cover for the PCV filter. I'm going to remove it completely for better visibility. By the way, if you ever get a high crankcase pressure alarm, this is the filter you want to change. The filter is keyed onto the shaft as it's spun by the engine to shed excess oil.
I realize that time lapse probably went by a little bit quickly if you were trying to follow it on how to remove the PCV filter. If you're trying to remove your PCV filter, make sure you check out this video for the full process, and I'll put a link in the video description so you know about things like this little Z tool that I made, or Z tool, to make the whole process easier. But now that we've got this apart, there's a couple things that I can see that I couldn't see before. The exploded diagram is not overly clear on how this all goes together. What I can see now is that I can't actually get a view of the two gears for the timing to see if that little pin comes all the way through the front. I can also get in and I can see the bolt that holds everything together, and that gave me an idea.
The bolt on the front is threaded directly into the high-pressure fuel pump control shaft, which has a Torx fitting on the back.
So if that's the case, I should be able to get a socket in through the front to the bolt and get a Torx star drive in the back to the coupling. And if I can turn the coupling on the back without the bolt on the front turning, I pretty clearly have a problem. There may be one step easier than that, because if the back half stopped spinning from a locked up pump and the front half kept spinning because it's driven by a chain from the crank, did this bolt actually shear? And if that's the case, can I just take the cover off the front and pull a bolt head out with a magnet? Let's think through this a little more. If the bolt that passes through both of these sprockets, and I keep saying gears and I mean sprockets, the bolt passes through the center of the two sprockets and then is tightened into what drives the pump. The only way that the rear part could not be turning with the front part turning is if the pin has sheared and the bolt is loose. So really, I should be able to tell by putting a socket in here, if I can turn that, then the back half is separate from the front. So let's take a look. I've taken the PCV filter cover off. We're going to stick a ratchet with a socket in there, and that doesn't turn, which to me says that that bolt is tight in the back, which is what drives the pump, which means it's also connected to the gears on the timing. If that was sheared from the gears on the timing and loose, I should be able to turn it, and I can't. Does that make sense? Or am I completely off my rocker here? Throw a comment down below, let me know what you think. So if the front is still connected to the back, and that means the back is spinning when the front is spinning, that means my pump is spinning. And if my pump is spinning and I'm not getting fuel pressure, does that mean that I just installed the second failed CP4 pump? Or is there something here that's allowing all the fuel pressure to dump back to the fuel tank? Is it possible when I installed the new used pump in the truck that I got the timing completely wrong? Yeah, of course that's possible, but I don't think that prevents the engine from running. I think it just doesn't run as smoothly. What do you think? I think at this point I've disproven my theory of pin 27 shearing, so I'm going to put this back together and move on to the next thing. But what's the next thing? Well, that's kind of what I was thinking myself, and luckily, while I was doing all of this stuff, a friend stopped by. We had a conversation of all the things that I've changed and all the things that I've done, and maybe something that I haven't. Because all the things I've really been focusing on for the last little while have been related to fuel, and with good reason. Here's a screenshot of when I was able to access the fuel pressure and what I'm getting.
Line 25 is rail pressure. Key on, we get 5 bar more than off, or 70 psi, about what the electric lift pump is putting out. But when I crank, this should jump way up and it doesn't move at all. This says to me the high pressure fuel pump isn't producing any pressure. Line 30 is expecting 369 bar, and line 29 is saying we're short.
So if I really am not getting sufficient fuel pressure, why? If it's not that the pump isn't being driven, either it's a dead pump, or is the fuel not actually being delivered to the pump? Now I know that I have 60 psi here because my gauge reads it, and that should be feeding 60 psi to the lubrication side of the pump, and 60 psi to the metering valve. Hang on, metering valve? Well, what if it's not metering anything? That's right, this little valve here is what controls fuel going to the pumping elements. So if the pumping elements aren't receiving any fuel, obviously they can't pump any fuel. I'm fairly confident that the metering valve itself isn't bad because I've used both this one and the other one on this pump, and both of them measure the same resistance. But what if the metering valve is getting the wrong signal from the computer?
Let's take a look at how this metering valve operates. There's a bunch of information here, but this is the key information we're looking for. This valve is wide open when no power is applied to it.
Let's just unplug you. Well, that's fine, but what if the computer can detect that it's unplugged? Well, let's trick it and use the old pump plugged in its place. I think it's fair to say at this point that I really don't have high hopes for any of this, but let's give it a try. Keyed on, fuel flowing, second pump plugged in, metering valve unplugged. Not going to do anything. We knew that was going to happen, but now at least, woo, looks like we had some fuel on top there. That's interesting. Let's try this again with the camera on and see if we see high pressure fuel spraying out of the rail.
No way.
Way.
What? No way.
What? No way.
No way.
What? No way.
No way. No way. Way. Yeah.
That absolutely looked like a puff of high pressure fuel. I can't tell where it's coming from, so I'm going to get my camera mounted a little closer and try it again.
Let's see what it looks like slowed down.
Something is definitely going on at injector number 2. I still can't quite tell where it's coming from. I'm going to see if I can get another angle where I can get a little bit closer up.
Wow, this engine shakes a lot when it's trying to start. Is it coming from underneath the injector?
I still can't see exactly where it's coming out, but we definitely have fuel in the vicinity of injector number 2 coming out at what appears to be quite a high pressure. To verify that what I just did was the issue, now that I have fuel coming out there, I'm going to plug the metering valve back in and see if it stops. Now, if I continue to get fuel out around injector number 2, clearly that wasn't the issue. But if it stops again, we could be onto something. Well, that just makes it more confusing. But here's what I know now. It's not the metering valve, but maybe it was the computer not talking to the metering valve. I also know there's definitely more than the electric lift pump pressure here while I'm cranking, because right now I have 60 psi from the lift pump and 0 leaks. But when I'm cranking, there's a spray. So obviously I'll have to chase down why the fuel is leaking out, but maybe we're not as far away as I thought from having this truck running. I hope you enjoyed that video. I sure am enjoying the fact that something is looking different. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
No way.